I had 11 days left on the listening post when the hail came through, and I was not supposed to be at that console at all. The reassignment order had been sitting in my file for 3 weeks. Cognitive screening, Category 2, downgraded from night watch to ground administration, effective the 1st of the month. My supervisor, a decent man named Toril who had known me 20 years, had been kind enough to let me keep my badge access through the transition period instead of walking me out the day the results came back. I used that kindness to sit in the same chair I had sat in for 2 decades, on shifts nobody had scheduled me for, listening to frequencies nobody had asked me to listen to. It was the one thing I still trusted my own hands to do correctly, and I was not ready to stop finding out whether that was still true. The post itself had been slated for decommission for 6 years, and kept alive by nothing but budget inertia, and men like me who didn't want it to close on our watch. Half the dish array on the North Ridge had gone dark before I ever sat down at that console. The other half still turned, slow and arthritic, tracking bands nobody had funded a reason to monitor since before Toril's time. I liked the sound of the old cooling fans in the equipment room below, a low, constant hum that had outlasted 3 department reorganizations, and, lately, my own certainty that I would still know the room when I walked into it. I made the coffee too strong that night, the way I always did on shifts I wasn't supposed to be working. The signal that night was garbage. That was my first read of it, and for about 4 seconds it was the correct one. It came in on a band we keep monitored out of old habit more than expectation, a leftover watch frequency from a listening protocol nobody above me remembers approving. Degraded carrier, harmonics folding over each other, the kind of signal that has crossed a great deal of empty space and lost pieces of itself along the way. I almost logged it as drift and went back to my coffee. Then the pattern under the noise resolved into something with structure, and the structure was a distress code, not one of ours, not built for us, not addressed to us, not shaped for a human ear at all. I could tell that from the header alone, the way you can tell a letter wasn't written to you even before you read past the greeting. It had the cadence of something sent toward a home authority, toward people who shared its assumptions, its abbreviations, its grief. Whatever had sent it had been aiming at its own kind. It had simply been aiming from far enough away, and for long enough, that by the time it arrived it wasn't precise anymore. It had drifted onto us the way smoke drifts into a room it wasn't lit for. I ran it anyway. That was against every standing order I had left the authority to violate, and I want to be honest, that I understood exactly what I was doing when I did it. The translation matrix took 40 minutes to give me anything coherent, and what it gave me was worse than static. A convoy. 6 vessels, originally 9, carrying what the signal called civil population. I read that as refugees, and I was not wrong. Their reactor cooling architecture had failed in a way their own engineers didn't have a protocol for, because the protocol that existed had been written for their homeworld's manufacturing standard, and these ships had been built somewhere else, in a hurry, out of whatever they'd had. Radiation exposure climbing on 4 of the 6. A junior officer's voice threading through the burst data, calm in the practiced way people are calm when panic would cost lives faster than the emergency itself. She gave coordinates that meant nothing to me. She gave a name, hers, Vesa Own, comms officer, in case, her words translated flat by the matrix. In case this reaches anyone who remembers where we were. It was not going to reach anyone who remembered where they were. It was going to reach a decommissioned coastal listening post on a planet that had never been on her list of recipients, received by a man who was, by every official measure, no longer fit to receive it. I sat with that for longer than I'm proud of. I thought about calling Toril, and decided against it fast, not out of pride but arithmetic. Waking him meant a chain of calls above him, and every link in that chain would want confirmation from a man whose confirmations had recently been downgraded to Category 2. I thought about the specialist's word for what was coming. Progressive, said gently. The way people say things they've said to a great many patients before me. What was left in me that still felt unimpaired was the certainty that frightened engineers deserved better than my caution. There is a procedure for contact of this kind. It runs up through 6 offices before anyone with a fleet under them even sees the transcript, and by the time it clears every office, the convoy in question generally either survives on its own or doesn't. I did not have 6 offices worth of time, and more to the point, I did not have 6 offices worth of trust in my own future memory. In 11 days, I would be behind a different desk. In some number of months after that, if the specialists were right, there would be days I didn't recognize Toral, let alone remember a convoy's reactor specifications with the precision required to argue for them. Whatever I decided to do that night, I needed to be able to do it completely, myself, before anyone with more authority and less time pressure could tell me to wait. I could not authorize a ship. I want to be clear that this was never a live option. No vessel moves without 4 signatures I did not have, and would not have had even at the height of my career. What I did have, sitting in an archive I had helped catalog 15 years earlier, during a rotation nobody remembers assigning me either, was Earth's full technical library on reactor containment failure and acute radiation response, cross-indexed by hull architecture, coolant chemistry, and, because some long-dead engineer had been thorough in a way I will be grateful for as long as I have a working mind, by exactly the kind of improvised, mismatched shipbuilding the convoy's ships described. I built the package myself, stabilization sequences for a cooling architecture close enough to theirs to matter, radiation triage protocols ranked by exposure severity, translated as plainly as the matrix would allow, with the plain language notes I'd have wanted, if I were the one reading them at speed with dying crew around me. I attached nothing that said where it came from. I attached no offer. No request for acknowledgement, no signature, just the data, addressed back along the drift path the hail had come in on the frequency it had arrived on, because it was the only address I had. Then I sent it, logged the transmission under my own name, because I was not willing to make someone else answer for it later, and went back to listening to nothing in particular until my shift, unscheduled as it was, ended. I never heard whether it worked. That is the truth of it, and I have made a kind of peace with not knowing, though it took time. The convoy was 6 ships and a great deal of distance, and a translation matrix doing its best with a dying signal, and I have no way of confirming that a data package built by one tired man on a decommissioned coastline reached anyone at all, let alone reach them fast enough. What I do know is that 3 days later, on my second-to-last shift, a fainter return signal crossed the same frequency, shorter, cleaner, the kind of transmission sent by people who have stopped being desperate. I could not translate all of it. The matrix caught one line clean, Reactor 4 holding. It caught Vesa-Own's name again, this time not as a plea but as a signature, the way you sign something once the emergency is over, and you're simply closing the file. I did not answer that one. There was nothing left to send, and I had already decided, before I sent the first package, that whatever this was, it was not going to become a correspondence. It was going to be one man answering one call that was never meant for him, once, correctly, before he no longer trusted himself to be correct about anything. I finished my 11 days. Toral walked me to the ground administration office himself on the morning of the 1st, and if he noticed the transmission logged under my name from 3 nights earlier, he never asked me about it, which I have always taken as its own kind of thanks. I do not know, some mornings now, whether I remember that convoy because I lived it, or because I have read my own transcript so many times that I've built the memory out of the record instead of the event. The specialists tell me this is common and expected, and not something to fight. I have stopped fighting most of it, but I keep one line from my own file where I can still find it, in my own handwriting, from a morning early enough that the hand was steadier than it is now. It was never addressed to us. I answered it anyway. That part, at least, I want to still be true on the day I can no longer prove I remember it.